Got a pretty amazing episode of Midweek with Max here. Max has got some great engineering updates for us to go over, and we're looking forward to hearing them. So while we're waiting for Rick to fix his problems and for Josh to sort out his audio issues, Max, why don't you take it away with us with some engineering updates?
All right, sounds good. Let's see, engineering side. Last week or so has been a lot of work continuing on the ZK side, doing some final improvements and optimizations to Oxygen, handling some testnet edge cases and making sure they align with the proper testnet 3 network, and doing some indexer and ZK proving testing. If anyone's been watching the Hemi network repos, you've also seen forks of RISC-0 and SP1 so far, with OpenVM coming soon. We're adding support for those to run on AMD cards and also doing some optimizations there for use in our upcoming ZK miner application, which people can use to contribute whatever computing power they have to ZK proving things on the Hemi network and earning tokens for doing so. I've also made progress on the ZK proving market, so we will hopefully be opening a limited beta of that to the beta tester channels in the near future, along with the ZK miner for people to test out. Initially, you can participate even if you just have a CPU, although it'll be slow. And then longer term, we'll probably roll that into some sort of public testing where a GPU realistically would probably be required to participate in that phase of it. Beyond that, made a lot of progress on the MinerFi side. We've been making some updates to the BNB's threshold signature scheme library, which we're using as the underlying cryptography for the threshold signature system in MinerFi, or the quote-unquote fast bridge. And so we pretty much got to a final version of that library. We're doing final review on that, and then we're going to ship that out for auditing. And then we are also working on updating Continuum, which is our daemon that actually uses the TSS library to do all the fast bridge stuff, and update that to work with the new simplified BNB library we've been working on, and also doing some final testing and sanity checks there, and doing some final analysis of the constraints for the ZK proving system that we introduced into that daemon to replace some of the traditional very large ZK proofs like the DLN and mod proofs in the threshold signature scheme that couldn't be used on chain, and so wouldn't give you full attributability of faults of participants in the system. So we've upgraded the library and Continuum to allow that fully on-chain key generation ceremony and key resharing ceremony ZK proving system, which basically lets us make the system more secure and robust against bad actors in the system. So at a smart contract level, essentially the protocol can determine if there's any misbehavior from any participant, who it was, when they misbehaved, how they misbehaved, and then eject them from the active validator set, and then recover with the remaining validators. So working on finalizing that system. Hopefully we'll have a version of that for testing sometime in the next couple weeks-ish. Again, that'll probably roll out in the private beta tester channel first. And so if you want to be one of the first people to try out some of the new stuff we're working on and get some bounties for participating, giving usability or bug, if there's any bugs or issues you encounter while using it, feedback, definitely make sure you are in the beta tester channel. And let's see, beyond that, I think that's all of the major engineering items. One other thing, I'm not sure if we talked about this last week, but Optimism, I think we did. Optimism is deprecating opgeth upstream. And so we are essentially translating everything over to the Rust version, so opreth and its accompanying daemons, so that we will be in line with what Optimism is maintaining upstream. So there's a soft deadline of May 31st for when they're dropping support for opgeth, and then the real sort of hard deadline is the next Ethereum fork upgrade after May 31st. And so we're working on updating the Rust daemons to be equivalent to the Go daemons we've been maintaining. And from a node operator perspective, if you are running a node either for testnet or mainnet, at some point here in the coming 2 to 3 months, you will be required to upgrade to the Rust daemons, and obviously at that point we'll publish transition guides and things to make it easier for people to migrate from the existing Geth-based node stack to the opreth-based node stack. So stay tuned for that. No immediate action items there, but just something to be aware of on the horizon. And I think with that, that is pretty much it for updates on the engineering side. We are still shipping the pop payouts algorithm soon to mainnet. There's not really too good of a reason for the delay, just other stuff like the optimism upstream changes taking a lot of engineering priority to sort that out. But we will be getting that deployed soon, as well as the pop points conversion to Hemi tokens. And on the Veriblock side, unfortunately, no major updates. It is still moving along and coming soon, but I don't have a new date or anything else to share at the moment. And with that, I will turn it over to Rick.
All right. Thank you, Max. Can you hear me now?
Yep, loud and clear.
Oh, fantastic. Sorry about that. I had to switch computers. I'm stuck in a hell loop on my Mac, so I hopped on my gaming PC. Apologize to JCV um for being on my gaming PC, but I didn't have a choice in this situation. Um well, you have currently covered two of the three questions. One being when VBK update, one being when will the new pop payout algorithm be implemented, and that brings us to question number three: when OG roll?
So we may have to delay the OG roll because of the unexpected additional scope of all the Rust rewriting that we have to do with the deadline attached to it. So we're working on a new timeline for that internally, and we'll announce a updated date next week on that. So again, not something we want to delay, but we have to prioritize engineering resources to keeping the network running and getting these, major features like ZK provability done. And so the OG role is something we may have to bump. But again, we don't have an updated date yet. We're still trying to fully scope all of the Rust conversion work so we can give a accurate updated deadline for that.
All right. So let's see. Um, so those were the three questions. Um, Shockingly very light this week in scope of questions, with the big three topics being covered. Do you want to talk about ZK provability?
I mean, we definitely could. We could go more into details on the oxygen architecture. Nobody wants to hear it, but we can do it. Actually, Marco, since you're chatting, do you want to talk about some of the BNB library stuff you've been working on? I think there's some interesting stuff there that we haven't really covered.
Sure. Well, it is a bit esoteric though, so I don't. Again, so now I'm going to hit. So people grab some coffee because you're going to fall asleep here pretty soon. So when we were starting to do the threshold signature schemes, we looked at the existing libraries, we debated through our own, and we found one that was actually reasonably looked reasonably well written and reasonably well documented, and it was the one that Binance wrote, and it was audited. So very useful to start working with. But as open source code often does, it was actually not documented at all, and the examples were lacking. So there was no real reference implementation. So we had essentially, well, even though we had code and it seemingly worked, we had to go reverse engineer the whole dang thing to make sure that A, we understood it well enough so that we could use it, and then B, make it do the thing we wanted. So that was a bit of an undertaking, but we tamed it. So we started out making the library do exactly what we expected and do what we wanted, which is the ability to have a large group of people come together and sign a transaction. But for that, you need keygen and reshare. Keygen is when these, let's say 100 parties have to all agree on how to sign a transaction, and then the reshare is when these same 100 parties decide that Bob was a bit of an ass and he needs to go and needs to be replaced with Charlie. So all of those worked. So you could create a party that could sign. You could then shuffle the party around and sign transactions. So everything was happy and merry, right up until Max decided that he wanted to not use P2P, but make the keygen and the reshare blockchain initiated. So, and in order to do that, he had to bolt on a whole bunch of ZK stuff, which I'm going to let him speak about here in a minute. And so that was a bit of an undertaking, and he wrote a whole bunch of code that enabled that portion. So then I got it back, and I had the pleasure of merging that into what we have called the continuum transfunctioner. For the people that are old enough, that's a reference to Dude, Where's My Car? Hilarious movie.
I'm gonna go to Hoboken, New Jersey.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely brilliant movie. But the continuum protocol, let me see, what was I?
And then
Yeah, and then, so with the continuum, the continuum protocol had all this stuff and had the match things. So then the initiation of keygen and reshare moved into a separate piece of code, so we can run them over P2P, but we don't by default. So that was the first big merge. And Max was about ready to send off the TSS lib as it existed to an auditor, and I had been griping for a while that the architecture of the library wasn't done right. It was doing things that you just don't want to do. We call them reach arounds, which is when a part of the stack is touching another part of the stack that it really shouldn't. And it was kind of endemic, and it was just the way that library was written. So because we had a delay, and I forget what it was, there was a little bit of extra time. So when I was able to untangle that. So, and now we have made the TSS lib, we actually forked it at this point and made a V3, so the version 3 out of it. We started with their version 2. And our version 3 is channel free, and it's just a bunch of functions that you can now call. And it also makes the whole reuse by third parties a lot easier. We have exhaustive tests and exhaustive examples. So anybody who wants to play with TSS should check it out. It's actually now very accessible, very well documented, 100% tested. Yeah, you heard it here first. So all the paths that can be hit without doing silly things are hit. So we're about to send it off to the auditors and see if they like us or not. Does that kind of cover it, Max?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great overview. So Mark mentioned one point that I'd like to highlight there. If you're doing anything, especially in Go, obviously, that you want to use some sort of threshold signature scheme library for, obviously wait until we get it audited, but the version that we're going to be maintaining for our use cases is a lot simpler, easier to use, and just overall more well architected for use as a library instead of this kind of hybrid between a library that's trying to do some like non-library things with these channels and Go routines and all this extra complexity that you have to sort of work around and deal with. So if you're doing anything that could benefit from a threshold signature system and you're looking for a library to use for that, that's probably a very small subset of the existing listeners today, just given how I don't know, targeted and specific it is. But the hope is, obviously we're going to be using this in our MinerFi/FastBridge system and probably some future things as well that benefit from threshold signatures. But it also lives as a standalone, well-structured, well-architected library for anyone to use in anything else they're building. So definitely something worth taking a look at. Just to give a little bit of context for what even threshold signature schemes are, and I think we've probably talked about this in previous weeks, but most people are probably familiar with multisig. So the idea that you have 5 people and you need at least three of them to collaboratively sign a transaction for it to be valid. And so, on Ethereum, you have stuff like formerly Gnosis Safe, now just known as Safe, which is a smart contract level implementation of multisig that each person has a unique identity or an EOA or a standard Ethereum address that they interact with, and they can provide their signature over a message to the contract, and then the contract, there's some more complex stuff inside, but basically just says, okay, do we have signatures from 3 of the 5 approved participants? If so, then we can perform this on-chain action, right? And that's enforced in code. And what threshold signature schemes let you do is implement essentially multi-sig, and I'm being a little inaccurate here, but essentially multi-sig at the cryptography level. And so one example people may be familiar with if you're coming from the Bitcoin space is with Schnorr signatures. Schnorr has some very nice cryptographic properties that let you easily aggregate signatures together. And so there's some multi-sig-like, threshold signature-like things you can do with Schnorr. For this TSS library, we're doing it with ECDSA. It also supports EDDSA, even though that's not useful for our purposes. But it lets you do similar things, but with a standard ECDSA signature. So instead of needing 3 or 5 people to each independently produce a signature and then validate that in whatever use case you want to, gate behind a multi-sig system, instead you do it all at the cryptography layer, and it's completely opaque to any application. So anything that's verifying the signature just sees that there is a valid ECDSA signature. And in the Bitcoin specific case, it keeps transactions very small because instead of the sort of standard OG multi-sig implementation in Bitcoin where you have a Bitcoin script that basically checks and counts, in air quotes, the number of signatures that are provided and make sure they meet a certain threshold. With threshold signature schemes, you just have one signature to validate on Bitcoin no matter how many participants there are. So whether there's one person signing or whether there's 1,000 people signing, at the end you get one single ECDSA signature. And so the on Bitcoin footprint does not grow as the number of participants in the quote unquote multi-sig system grows. But the other major benefit is the ability to do, at least in this case, resharing, which means if you have a initial setup with 3 or 5 participants, and then one of those participants leaves for whatever reason, either they're non-responsive and not participating in the system anymore, or they want to leave and stop, doing their duties, but they want to do so in a more graceful fashion, the system can reshare the keys essentially to a new group of participants, which can overlap with the old group. It can be bigger, it can be smaller. And so specifically for the MinerFi fast bridge, this resharing is really critical because the goal of the MinerFi / fast bridge, again, we'll get a final name before we actually launch the product. But one of the things that we were trying to do with that system is give people Bitcoin deposit addresses that survive for very long periods of time. And so you could register or reserve, more accurately, a Bitcoin deposit address, and then you could configure that in your, say, mining pool. That's where the original MinerFi moniker came from. Or you could configure it as, a approved withdrawal address in an exchange you're using that you continually, every month you buy a little bit of Bitcoin and you want to withdraw it and automatically deposit it into the DeFi chutes and ladders on Hemi. And so having this long-lived Bitcoin deposit address was an important part of the system. But with a traditional, non-resharable multi-sig or threshold signature construction, you couldn't do that because each time that you need to rotate participants in and out, you need to generate brand new key sets, which means the Bitcoin addresses that they control are also different. And so this resharing mechanic lets us have a group of VE Hemi stakers who are all bonded by the Hemi tokens they have staked. They all participate in this initial key generation ceremony. And then each epoch of the system, which is probably going to be set to somewhere between 1 week and a month, probably in the 2-week range, realistically, there is a validator rotation where all of the old participants reshare the existing key to all of the new participants, the existing master key. And this essentially lets the system, kind of like how Ethereum proof of stake, validators can join, validators can leave, and the system stays secure because it knows who should be validating stuff at any point in time. On MinerFi, we're doing something similar in a very, very abstract sense, but at the cryptography layer, where instead of each participant having an independent identity and keeping track of which identities are currently active, which you couldn't do on Bitcoin and keep Bitcoin addresses secure, instead we have this resharing system, so we can rotate validators in and out of the system while maintaining access and security of old keys. And so the way the overall system works is you have these, again, epochs. Each epoch, the new validator set who's coming in, who may be, if there's no changes, the old validator set 1-to-1. It may be the old validator set plus one new member. It may be the old validator set minus a member. or plus some members, minus some members, whatever it is. And so each epoch, they generate a brand new key, which has security going forward, in that there's no set of old participants who could potentially collude to get access to the old keys. But then there's also this resharing that happens for all of the old keys from all the old epochs to maintain access to all of the old Bitcoin deposit addresses that people reserved in the fast bridge system. And so it gets the best of both worlds, where we can have people can generate addresses every epoch and always get complete security guarantee backed by all of the economic stake that's in the VE Hemi system, backing all the validators who generated the current key set and are still bonded in the system. Or you can use older keys with slightly less security, but still relatively good security with this resharing system. And so it lets us build this sort of hybrid architecture where we can have long-lived Bitcoin deposit addresses, but we can also allow participants to cycle in and out of being part of the quote-unquote multi-sig system that secures those deposit addresses for the purposes of bridging. And from a security perspective, it's also important to recognize the system is just for transient Bitcoin through a liquidity layer. And so there's not going to be large amounts of Bitcoin living long-term in this threshold signature scheme. It's used as a liquidity layer around Hemi BTC. So somebody wants to onboard, one Bitcoin, they deposit it into the system with a deposit address. The operators sweep that Bitcoin deposit and then release the corresponding Hemi BTC that's already existing at the smart contract layer and deposit as liquidity into the system. And then somebody else wants to withdraw one Bitcoin, so they withdraw one Hemi BTC, and the validators in the threshold signature scheme send that Bitcoin out. So there's always this sort of self-balancing mechanic around the actual native Bitcoin that's stored in the system, and it's just used as this sort of transient onboarding liquidity system around the actual canonical Bitcoin tunnel, which is useful today, or as soon as the system's launched, but becomes a lot more important with HBitVM, because with HBitVM we have these giant Bitcoin deposit vaults where economically it doesn't make sense for somebody depositing 0.1 Bitcoin to be able to afford the fees that would make economical sense for all of these covenant emulators to spin up, all of these operators to stake VE Hemi positions and become operators in this particular HBitVM vault, and also for the unwinding of the vault to potentially pay the worst case fees for a fault dispute that needs to be worked through on-chain on Bitcoin. And so with the MinerFi fast bridge system, it's basically this liquidity wrapper around the bridge. When we do go to HBitVM, larger LPs can be the ones who create and unwind HBitVM vaults with larger Bitcoin deposits, say in the order of 10 to 100 BTC or more, but minimum 10 to 100. And then the fast bridge system can be the easy on and off boarding for people who want to quickly move smaller amounts of Bitcoin on and off the network. And so I think with that, that's pretty much the MinerFi system in a nutshell. I don't know, John, if you had anything else to add to that.
No, that was a pretty thorough description of MinerFi.
I think that was long enough to get some additional community questions.
It did. It was the perfect length for additional community questions. Well done, sir. All right. When will Midweek with Max be on YouTube and X?
It is something we want to do. So the tricky part of this is a lot of people are probably familiar with some of the systems like OBS or the restreaming systems like StreamYard. None of those are compatible with Discord. So there's really, to my knowledge at least, not that I'm a Discord expert, I couldn't figure out how to bring people on stage earlier, but basically there's no way to stream into Discord anything that exists as a Discord event where we can all talk here like we're doing now, whatever that's called. There's that has to be done natively on Discord. So everyone who's participating has to be logged into Discord, sitting on Discord, chatting here. And so when we did the ZK AMA and the AI happy hour, and I believe also Jeff's AI session, all of that went through another third-party tool that does restreaming to all these different services. But it's sort of an either-or decision of either we do something in Discord or we do something through that restreaming service, and it echoes out to YouTube, X, and LinkedIn for some reason, in case people want to watch on LinkedIn. And so we would have to move Midweek from Discord to being just available across those channels instead. And it's something that if there's enough community interest and enough of the people who show up every week here on Discord would rather see it on those platforms, it's definitely something we can look into doing, but we didn't want to change the accessibility to this audience basically and migrate to only the people who could interact through those channels. There's also some complexities with handling questions from multiple different areas at once. I believe that's mostly a solved issue at this point on our side, but that's the main reason is we would have to leave Discord. We can't just echo it out. So theoretically, we did talk about an architecture where we could have a relay box that's a VM that logs into Discord and basically watches this stream as a viewer and screen captures it and then streams it through one of the restreaming services. But that's a pretty janky setup. So we may do something like that in the future. It's not something we're actively working on, but that was the summary from our research is if we want to keep it on Discord, we need this sort of weird intermediate, box to record and rebroadcast everything happening on Discord out. And if we don't want to do that, we would have to leave Discord and move to the other platforms entirely.
I'll sum it up even briefer. All streaming services suck, and Discord just decides to be special and suck in its own special way that doesn't fit as nicely into the way the other guys suck. So that leaves it slightly complicated for us to accommodate everything.
That was a great way to sum it up. I miss TeamSpeak. I don't know if anyone else misses TeamSpeak, but TeamSpeak was far superior to Discord. Oh, Josh put a poll up. There is now a poll that Joshua has posted regarding Midweek with Max. So everyone check that out because it could determine where we host. All right. What else we got? Oh my God in heaven, we get a lot of questions. I apologize for my voice, by the way. I'm just getting over a pretty nasty respiratory thing. So if I sound a little terrible, that's why. Let's see. When will the next VE Hemi reward distribution take place?
Before mid-April, so maybe sooner, but the drop dead date would be, say, April 15th.
All right. On the subject of reward distributions, when beta tester rewards, and can you give us an idea of what the rewards will be like?
I don't have a great answer for this one yet. I think probably the first round of beta testing rewards we do will be sort of see how many people show up, see how useful feedback we get and how engaged people are, and then decide rewards from there. We do want to do it in a way where the people who are doing more testing and contributing, quality bug reports of issues they encountered with steps to reproduce them, quality UI UX feedback, stuff like that, get rewarded more than somebody who just, says, hey, I tested it, looks good, thanks. So it'll be a little bit of figuring it out the first time we do it. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say probably something in the range of 1,000 to 10,000 tokens for somebody who's doing very engaged testing and giving quality feedback. But again, that's A, large range, and B, it's something that we're going to figure out as we go through it the first time. And then once we have that data of what worked, how much feedback, how much engagement we got, whether it was 3 people participating or 50, then we'll use that to put together a more concrete reward system for future beta testers. It also depends on what's being beta tested too. If we're asking people to go and beta test something that requires, a small amount of real world assets like, $10 or $100 worth of a stable coin or Bitcoin or whatever, then obviously the rewards would be scaled up based on that versus something like hey, on testnet, go and try this thing, and you don't need any real assets. You're not putting any assets at risk in a beta system, stuff of that nature. So it's going to depend. It'll be a case-by-case basis, but we do want to make sure people who are, spending their time and giving quality, actionable feedback, either from a bug perspective or a usability perspective, that they are, getting a reward that's worth their trouble to do so.
All right. Next question is when guild? I can field this one. Joshua and I are actually finalizing the last steps of guild. I believe he has some more on-chain tasks to add, but I would say probably next week or the following. The following being more likely because we're going to be doing some co-marketing with the guild team. They're going to be giving us like a pretty solid boost when we do go live, which is amazing on their end. Josh, does that sound accurate to you? I know you can't talk right now because apparently Discord is blaming the movie Crocodile Dundee 2 on Joshua and punishing Australia, not allowing them to speak on Discord. But
You
let's
call
see.
that a mic? Now that's a mic.
I think that was Crocodile Dundee 1, if we're being accurate.
I know, but it needed to be made. A reference.
It had to. It had to. I appreciate the Paul Hogan reference. Okay, here. Josh said, we plan by either end of the month or very early next month. Yep, that's accurate. Let's see. If someone new wants to do guild or testing, is he eligible? If he didn't do testnet? Absolutely. Yeah, guild is going to be open community-wide. So there's going to be certain paths and tasks where if you have let's say more of a community history of having like the creative roles and whatnot, certain paths will be more open to you, but it's going to be very easy lifting from like a newbie perspective. So realistically, anyone interested in being part of the guild program can just jump in and start doing it. And it's a really good onboard for on-chain tasks, off-chain tasks, etc., etc. And yes, Omni, you do have the rap god role. We can all acknowledge that. All right, let's move on. But yes, next week or the following week for Guild. We just have a couple more things to finalize that Joshua and I will be doing this week. My apologies on the delay on this. I was out most of last week, and so I lost a little time on that end. So apologies for that delay, but it will be happening next week or the following. Let's see. Here's a good one. Will Hemi be attending any in-person events soon, such as ETHCC or Paris Blockchain Week Summit? I believe this is coming from Alex, as I believe he is attending those.
I am not the right person to ask about events and travel and plans. I'm not sure about ECC or Paris Blockchain Week. My guess is we would at least have some people from the BD team there, but I'm not sure if we're doing anything broader than that, like any side events or anything of that nature. I do think it hasn't been finalized yet, but we're looking at doing something around the Bitcoin conference that's in Las Vegas. But again, I don't think anything there is finalized yet. So we'll certainly have some team members there, but I'm not sure what the extent of our events and participation stuff will be. But definitely, as soon as we finalize that, we'll make some community announcements so anyone who's going to be at those events can come and find us.
I'd like to make it publicly known that I am very available to attend the Las Vegas events. should the team or the community need me, Ricky is free to go to Las Vegas. Just throwing it out there. All right, what do we got here? Here's a good one. This is actually a great question for both Max and JCV. Konang asks, before studying blockchain, what prerequisites should I have?
I'm curious to hear JCV's thoughts on this. From my perspective, you don't really need any prerequisites. It depends what you want to do in blockchain, but there's a lot of things that are, you can kind of learn all the requirements as you go. And this is largely speaking from personal experience. I got into blockchain. I was obviously interested in computer science and programming and had some level of skill in those, which was at the time pretty minimal. But I personally, I learned almost everything I need as part of trying to create different projects in the blockchain ecosystem, from modifying GPU miners to mine faster, to building pool software, to all kinds of other things, working on a project that tried to replace proof of work with protein folding. And that was a great learning experience into the value of quote unquote useless proof of work and game theory and incentive alignment. But if there's something in blockchain that interests you, from my perspective, just pursue it, start learning it, understand. Obviously, it depends what you're interested in doing, but generally speaking, there's going to be some pieces that touch game theory. So if you're designing a DeFi protocol, how do you structure it so that participants are behaving in a way that is aligned with the system's goals, whether that's, they're collateralized against misbehavior, or the system's designed so there is no misbehavior possible, or whatever that may be. So there's going to be some game theory, which is kind of softer and relatively easy to get started with, even if you don't have a technical background. And then if you're actually, creating a DeFi protocol or a blockchain protocol itself, or you want to contribute to an existing blockchain project and fix bugs or add features to blockchain daemons and stuff, there's definitely more technical groundwork that you need to do. But in my opinion, you can do that as you learn the blockchain pieces of it as well. So I think blockchain is a great place to learn programming. It's a great place to learn cryptography. It's a great place to learn game theory. You don't necessarily need to go and learn all those in isolation and then come to the blockchain ecosystem fully armed to learn blockchain, if that makes sense. But definitely curious to hear JCV's thoughts on that as well.
Yep. So I'd say there's one thing that would help you a lot, and that's having some basic, like, either scripting or, Unixy stuff, just because no matter what direction you go in blockchain. So if you decide you really just care about some DeFi data, being able to, grab and manipulate that in some way programmatically will help you. If you decide you really care about, running how the networks run, being able to do some scripting with that will help you. But beyond that, it's kind of like I follow very much along the lines, although phrased differently from what Max said. There's a ton of different directions you could go. And I guess the important thing is don't worry about the fact that a lot of what you'll learn won't strictly be in blockchain. Just, find the areas in blockchain that interest you and be willing to go down those rabbit holes. Maybe game theory does matter a lot to you. Maybe optimizing database says, if there's something deeply wrong with you, you might want to do that. And that's blockchain gives you a really good opening for that. And then you can use that heavily in there. Maybe you care about the economic aspects of it, and or maybe you're just some degenerate gambler who decided that normal gambling's not good enough, you need to do gambling in DeFi. But regardless, there's a whole bunch of different directions, and you should be able to go any of them. And also, as Rick just pointed out, we have very, very, very soon, our Teach Rick Crypto series is going to have our first episode coming out, which is meant to provide a nice sort of grounding and intro into just what the hell all of this is about.
And I would add, if you do want sort of a, starter kit, quote unquote, for what are some of the most important kind of basic essentials to coming into crypto and understanding the ecosystem broadly, I'd first start with really basic cryptography. Look up, understand hash functions and digital signatures. Understand Bitcoin proof of work. Understand, proof of work's easy to understand. It's one of those things that it kind of forces you to understand subcomponents of how hash functions work, the, statistical likelihood of hashes starting with a certain number of zeros if they're truly randomly distributed, things like that. You'll kind of learn as you think through proof of work. It's a little dated at this point. There may be an updated revision, but if you want to dive more into the details, there's a great book, Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas Antonopoulos. That's an amazing intro to tons of blockchain concepts, and it dives actually really deep into a lot of the Bitcoin internals. And so whether, if you don't want to do something that's very Bitcoin heavy, you can skip a lot of that. But I think an understanding of proof of work at a minimum is important to kind of understand where blockchain came from and kind of why it exists, and then why there's these alternatives in the ecosystem like proof of stake, and what the high level trade-offs are of swapping out computational power for economic stake. And then if you want to do anything in DeFi, basic Solidity, it's there's tons of great tutorials, and it's very easy to get started. A lot of this is becoming probably less of an issue now, but sometimes getting started with programming in a new language is a little bit challenging, not even because of the language itself, but because of all the tooling and scaffolding that you need to, install on your computer. And then you need, for most normal people who aren't JCV and Marco, you need a, IDE that gives you syntactical sugar and highlighting and things that are helpful in an easy to use interface. And so with Solidity, you can just use Remix. It's an online IDE. It has everything built in. It runs in your browser. It's not the right tool for developing, very large smart contract systems and maintaining them, but it's a great way to literally open a tab in your browser next to a YouTube tutorial of Solidity and write some things, deploy them to a test network, play around with them, see how they work. It integrates with MetaMask in your browser, so you can write your contract and then deploy it to testnet or whatever, and then use your embedded MetaMask wallet in your browser to interact with your smart contract. And a little buggy, a little rough around the edges, but super easy way to get started if you're interested in the DeFi, smart contract development side. And then if you're interested in the game theory side and you want to dive more into consensus protocols, again, understanding proof of work is kind of a basic entry level knowledge that a lot of stuff stems it from, and will make more sense if you understand proof of work as a foundation. But then looking into the different types of proof of stake, why Ethereum implemented their proof of stake in this way, and the Cosmos ecosystem did it this way, and what the trade-offs are between them. There's a lot of really good information and breakdowns online of consensus protocols, because it's been something that the industry has been working on developing basically since Bitcoin itself was launched. And so there's tons of great content for that. And then also AI is a great tool for learning. Now, sometimes it just hallucinates random garbage. As a concrete example, I was testing out, maybe this is resolved by now, this was like 6 months ago, but I was asking, I think it was, ChatGPT to summarize the differences between Ethereum and Cosmos proof of stake, and it got it completely backwards. It said that Cosmos is liveness preserving and more decentralized, and Ethereum is optimizing for safety and never having a reorg, which is the exact opposite of the truth. So be careful if you're using AI tools, but it can be a great way to, ask relatively basic questions about the space and get a good digestible answer, ask for more detail. And so when paired with like actual human created, human reviewed educational content, it can be a good learning sidecar as well.
All right.
And I also
Yes, John Emacs does do syntax highlighting, I know.
no, but I did want to also really your recommendation for mastering Bitcoin. I cannot recommend that book enough. Yes, it's old. Yes, it's Bitcoin centric, but nobody has written a book that's that good on Ethereum or on anything other than Bitcoin in the crypto space. Like, it's really worth it. And yeah, I just highly recommend it.
And also, as much as we talk about, Bitcoin's limitations and all these advanced complex stuff you have to do to work around them to build like HBit VM, for example, Bitcoin itself, if you just want to understand how the Bitcoin protocol works, it is relatively simple compared to something like Ethereum. So, Bitcoin, you have a block with a header. The header has to hash to below a certain target. That target changes over time based on how many people are mining on the network. Then you have a block with transactions. There's only one, transaction type, so to speak. There, you can get pedantic and, define transaction types by the script type and whatnot, but there's one sort of macro transaction format. You don't have like blob transactions versus set code transactions versus legacy and EIP 1559. It's one overall transaction format. There's a couple fields in it that you can mostly ignore for understanding the basics of the protocol. The scripting language is very simple in the sense of it's not easy, but it's relatively simple to understand, at least at a basic level, how the scripting system works. Some of the new features like, tap script get a little more sophisticated, but you don't really, unless you're doing weird stuff with Bitcoin like we are, you probably really don't need to understand the internals of something like, the tap script system and taproot and script merkleization, all that. You can just understand the sort of original Bitcoin protocol, or a minorly updated version as of 2013, and that's a really good baseline for understanding blockchain. And then as you dive into more complex systems like understanding Ethereum, a lot of the knowledge and understanding from Bitcoin translates very well, and you can see the differences of, okay, here's why Ethereum has the EVM, and you already learned, at least to a basic extent, how Bitcoin script works and its limitations and its lack of programmatic flow control and limited opcode support. So then it makes sense why you have an EVM and why some of the trade-offs like the halting problem are now issues in the EVM, and then you can dive into how Ethereum solves them. And so even if you're not doing something with Bitcoin, and again, tons of people start out in blockchain and start with Ethereum from day one, but if you really want that sort of ground understanding of what is the, in relative terms, the simplest version of a blockchain protocol, how does it work, Bitcoin's a great place to start because it is simple compared to everything else, even if it's very complex in what you have to do in order to make things work on top of it. In a lot of cases, understanding the actual protocols relatively easy, and then it's a good base to build knowledge for other blockchain ecosystems, how DeFi works, different consensus protocols, all of that on top of that sort of base layer of Bitcoin knowledge.
Oh, and one other book I want to really push on. There's a site leastauthority.com, and they have this moon math manual, they call it, which is like a 200 something page textbook basically on zero knowledge stuff, but it starts from really basic, a lot of integer math, number theory, going down pretty far into some elliptical curve stuff and other fairly deep math. But if you want to get deep into ZK stuff but feel that like you're a little behind on the math, or if you want to get deep into ZK stuff and you feel like you used to know the math but have forgotten everything, it's a really great textbook on math, assuming you're the type that thinks there can be a great textbook on math. I think there can be, but some people feel otherwise. But again, it's like leastauthority.com, and or if you search for Moon Math Manual, it's a really helpful book if such things are. If you want to be caught up for the next time Max wants to bring up ZK stuff, it's a good, like 200 something pages to go through.
Yeah, it's a great resource if you want to dive into the math and sort of understand how all these cryptographic systems actually work. I would add to that too, from an engineering perspective, it's great to understand sort of the mathematical, fundamentals of ZK and the different ZK systems. But from a realistic perspective, you can build. The ZK space has evolved enough especially with ZK VMs, that you can build applications that use ZK if you just understand the principles of ZK systems from an engineering perspective. You don't necessarily need to understand, circuit arithmetization or something like that. You can understand, hey, I have this program. If I run it in this way, then I can produce a ZK proof that this data put into this program gives this result, right? And so as much as I recommend that as a resource if you really want to dive into the details, don't let that scare you away from some of the more complex things like ZK in the ecosystem, because 5 years ago it would have been a different answer, but now it's been largely simplified to the extent that from an engineering perspective, you can utilize the tools as long as you understand how they work and what the trade-offs are. You don't need to necessarily understand all the underlying math and cryptography behind these systems to make use of them. So
like most things in crypto, you kind of get to choose how deep down each particular path you want to go. You can be very productive and do all sorts of great things with only, minimal knowledge of, a bunch of different areas. But if there's one area that, you find interesting, you can go absolutely absurdly deep down it if you want. And that's part of why this is still a fun area to be in.
And there is always something new. So nobody ever knows blockchain. It's as with everything, but especially blockchain, it's evolving all the time. There's all sorts of new ideas, new breakthroughs. If you want, we've probably gone way too long on this answer, but this is also kind of useful. If you're, I think the sort of generalist approach tends to work well for people where, you're not, maybe the end goal is you want to build DeFi applications, but it's good to understand a little bit about consensus protocols so that you understand, what could a chain reorg mean for your application? And depending on where you're deploying it, are reorgs possible? How deep of a reorg is possible? So things like that. There's a lot of cross-sectional, or I don't know the fancy term for it, but there's a lot of interplay between the different layers of blockchain that you don't need to be an expert on consensus protocols to write a DeFi application, obviously, but having some basic knowledge of, Ethereum proof of stake behaves a little different than proof of stake in the Cosmos ecosystem, for example. And so if I'm writing a smart contract, that's something that I do need to, on Ethereum, take into account that there could be these short reorgs that could revert state. And so if I'm doing something that's, cross-chain perhaps, or, relies on an external oracle that could be reverted and then give stale data and catch up with the chain or whatever, there are things like that it's helpful to have a little bit in each bucket, enough to understand sort of the properties of the system you're using, even if you don't understand exactly how they work. So you don't need to understand state grinding attacks and the finalization threshold and, LMD ghost or whatever. But if hey, I'm working on Ethereum, that means theoretically we could see a reorg that, is 6 to 12 minutes in the worst case. That knowledge is helpful for how you design and architect your, DeFi application. And so there's a lot of instances of that throughout the space where, again, you don't need to understand moon math to use a ZK proof somewhere, but it's good to understand, hey, I'm using, a Stark prover that's quantum resistant, but then I'm wrapping it in Groth 16 and I'm losing that quantum resistance property. Good to know. So there's a lot of things like that where, again, you don't need to do that deep dive and be an expert, but having that, first level of knowledge about everything that kind of underpins the level that you're working at is generally useful for building stable, secure applications.
All right. That was a really great snippet. Let us see. We have one more question, and this is probably a good one to go out on this week. Excalibur asks, is there anything the community can do to help with institutional onboarding?
That's a good question. I think probably at a macro, just continue being a part of the ecosystem, continue testing things, giving feedback. Nobody wants a chain where nobody's doing anything interesting, where nobody's testing it, where nobody's using it. And so, you need both sides. You can't, it doesn't make sense to build a chain that is purely institutional, right? You can have an institutional focus, or you can have certain applications targeted towards institutions because of their, say, complexity or their risk profile or the way that they're managed or, what have you. But what we're trying to build with Hemi is a general compute layer that sits between Bitcoin and Ethereum. It gives you access to both networks. It lets you build applications across both networks. And, the more adoption and testing and utilization we get from everyday people who are building and using interesting new DeFi primitives, playing around with different parts of the system, finding bugs or issues, reviewing the code, contributing to the, whether it's on the smart contract side or the daemon side or useful utilities for the ecosystem or educational content, all of that contributes to creating an ecosystem where stuff's going on and there's transaction volume, there's, history of the network operating correctly and working the way everyone expects. And those sorts of things help institutions come in, do their due diligence, understand that the system's stable. It's been running for a while. It's been running with real users, doing real things on the network. And so I think all of that contributes to institutions. It doesn't make sense to build an institutional chain. Instead, you build a chain that is capable of doing what tons of people in the DeFi ecosystem want, and also what institutions want. And part of what institutions want is to see other people using and kicking the tires on whatever system that they're going to be adopting.
All right, great answer. Jeremy, do we have any updates from the marketing side before we start to wrap things up?
Yeah, actually, we do. I'm looking forward to potentially, and I'm not going to put this out in stone yet, but I'm going to say we've been having a lot of fun streaming. We're going to potentially have a partner come on this Friday to be announced for another stream where you'll have a chance to ask them some questions and learn about their protocol. They're built on Hemi, and when we know more about them firmed up, we'll be able to let you know who it is. So keep your eyes peeled.
All right. So potential surprise coming on Friday. Gotta like that. All right. Well, it looks like we have reached time. Thank you all for the additional questions. Remember, if we don't have enough questions, we will just turn Max loose on ZK provability. So make sure to get those questions in, unless you want to be here for a couple hours talking about ZK provability. I personally enjoy it, but you know, I'm a bit of a masochist, and I like Max. I like when Max talks about ZK provability. It's very calming in a weird way, even though I don't understand most of it. Because, well, we haven't reached that episode of Teach Rick Crypto yet, in my defense. And that's another thing. Teach Rick Crypto is coming very soon. It'll be a very good crash course for complete newbies, but also have enough, knowledge from experts, not me, where you will you'll get something out of it and start looking at things in the space a different way. Hopefully, that's the goal, at least. Well, with that, thank you everyone for attending another Midweek with Max. Reminder that the poll is open about the future of the series. Do we keep it on Discord? Do we move to X and YouTube? And for some godforsaken reason, LinkedIn. If anyone watches Midweek with Max on LinkedIn, I think that might be a sign that they need institutional help and not the institution in our space. But anyway, I digress. With that, thank you to our community moderation team. Thank you so much for the team, and thank you so much for the community and all the amigos for attending. And let me turn it over now to JCV, Max, and Jeremy for some outros, and I will see y'all next week.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for attending another Midweek with Max, and hopefully we will see you all next week as well, and have some interesting updates on the MinerFi and ZK provability sides to share. If you want to be involved in testing a lot of these features before they're actually rolled out to production, definitely join the beta testers channel. We're going to have, not sure the exact timeline, but in the relatively near future, some cool stuff for people to play around with. And so stay tuned for that. And with that, we will see everyone next week. And also definitely give your opinion on that poll for where Midweek with Max should be hosted, because for now we've been sticking with Discord because we have this community here. People throw up, people ask good questions. We don't want to, sort of lose the magic in air quotes, but if people are more interested in seeing it on other platforms, we obviously do have systems set up for broadcasting those we're using for other use cases. So if you'd rather see Midweek with Max on those platforms, definitely let us know in that poll.
Oh, on a closing note, with Guild coming in the next couple of weeks, just a reminder that the creative roles are still open in Discord and will remain open, and it might not be a bad time to start pushing for those roles. That would be the based content creator and community creative, which actually technically is only available in contests, but we might have one coming up really soon. But try to get those creative roles. It'll open some new paths on the Discord end for you. And yes, creative roles may be changing as well as we roll out the guild program. Not to worry to the folks who hold those roles. Your roles will be preserved, but we're just looking at new ways to integrate that. So I have rambled enough, and my throat hurts. And with that, thank you all so much. we will see you next week on this platform, but depending on polls, it may be a different platform in the future. So take care, all. Hemi strong. Thank you to the Amigos, moderation team, and the Hemi team. I'm going to shut the hell up now. Take care, all.
All right, bye bye.
Bye, guys.